Let's have a lesson and discussion on this etude now. Follow the lesson for free and just pick up all the tips, but if you're interested, I do have a sheet music edition of all 25 etudes in Carcassi's Op.60. There's a link for that in the description. Etude number 3 is a very one of his more beautiful works in the collection, but also still very pedagogically clear. We've got our arpeggio texture with a melody on the top, and he's very strict from start to finish with that texture. Another aspect of the piece to work on is just your general balance of the arpeggio itself. So we kind of have a hierarchy here. We want the melody to pop out. So we want those upper notes, the F, E, to pop out of the texture. But we also want a certain amount of bass sustain. And then the inner notes, played often with I and M, we just want those to be pretty soft. So we have, the upper note melody is our loudest in general. There's still contour to it. The bass note can be next because we want a good cushion of bass sustain underneath us to support the sound. And then those accompaniment notes of the chord can just be quite soft. So the main thing to focus on is just keeping IM nice and soft. It's not something you micromanage, but you're just not digging in with those fingers, and you're focusing on the contour of that upper melody with the A finger. And then just don't be scared to use the thumb. Don't pound it out, of course, but it should have some presence. So for the student, there's an aspect of musicality here. There's like there's an overall phrasing, but there's also this little kind of strong, weak non-chord tone leading to a chord tone, which I'll discuss in a second, aspect to the piece. But there's also some, the arpeggio navigation, so navigating the fretboard and dealing with that. And then there's just a couple of other little things that come up, but that's the main thing. So the way I would probably practice this piece is you could learn the chord shapes in block form. Most of the bass strings are open, so you always have a lot of time to navigate to the next chord fairly easily. But some of them you do have to kind of get the bass note first and then the rest of the chords, so you can try it broken up. Practicing it in this way just reminds your hand that you need to get the bass note first and then the rest of the chord in order to transition smoothly from one chord to the next. Because while you're holding on to this, you just need to get that next note and connect this chord to the next note and then get the rest of the notes so that there's as little clipping as possible when you shift from one position of the guitar to another. So this piece is filled with non-chord tones resolving to chord tones. And what that means is that when you're playing the first measure, for example, the first F that you encounter, that's actually not part of the chord. We have an A major chord here, and that F sharp is not part of it. So it's a non-chord tone, so like a tension note or a spicy note. F sharp isn't too spicy in this particular chord, but it's a non-chord tone, a note that's not part of the chord, but it resolves to the E, and the E is part of the chord. So usually when we have like a non-chord tone resolving like that, we'll go strong, weak, or like tension, resolution, spicy note to mild note, or to the note that fits. And, you know, depending on the chord you're playing, the note could be more spicy. You know, that's a non-chord tone, that F sharp. But then it resolves. You know, and the whole piece works like this. It gives you a non-chord tone and then resolves. That's why you get lots of those strong, weak ideas through the piece, except in a few areas where he actually ditches that idea to take you toward a cadence. So it's usually at the end of the section or the end of the phrase where he's taking you through to a cadence, and then you start the whole process again. You can practice that in lots of different ways. Most of the time we just think of it as a deeper follow through with that finger. You can even, just for practice purposes, almost touch your palm afterwards with just the first stroke. You know, really deep follow through, and then not much of a follow through for the E, just a little kind of movement. But one way I practice it, and remember, this is not a performance practice, this is not how I perform it, but it's just a way of practicing, is I will do the strong note with the rest stroke. So all free stroke, rest, and the rest are all free stroke. So rest stroke, free stroke, rest stroke, free stroke, rest stroke, free stroke, rest stroke, free stroke. Now, some of you might not be used to playing like a free stroke texture and including a single rest stroke in there. So this is a good opportunity to work on that. But what you'll find is if you do that, if you take just like the first section of this piece and practice it with that rest stroke, do it like 3 times in a row, and then stop doing it and do all free stroke, because I perform it with all free stroke. But switch to all free stroke, and you'll notice that the muscle memory of doing a rest stroke on that note is actually present in your hand when you're doing all free strokes. You just kind of remember to do a deeper stroke with that finger on that particular note. And this is a really great thing you can do in all your pieces when you want to bring a note out of the texture, is practice it in a way that encourages the muscle memory to remember a deeper, you know, follow through a deeper stroke on that note. And then when you switch to all free stroke, your fingers just remember, and it's a really great practice method. Plus, it's good for your technique to practice, you know, rest stroke on a single note like that. I think that's most of what I want to say. His dynamics are a little bit funny sometimes in this particular piece. Overall, I like to follow them, and when he says crescendo, I crescendo and things like that. But you know, right next to his crescendo, sometimes he has a piano, and so you have to kind of like blur, you know, you can look at his dynamics and then let it kind of blur a little bit in your vision, and then just kind of play it how you think is natural, considering his dynamics, but letting it all blend a little bit more than it looks on the page when it's written down in the way that he does it. Sometimes it's just like a little too weird or a little too blunt of a delivery in terms of like written dynamics. So you just let it kind of blur, and then you play it with natural phrasing. Okay, so I think we've talked about some good musicality things and some good technique aspects of the piece. So let's just do a little walkthrough of it and see if we can discover anything else we have to talk about. Some people might do a bar for this, for measure 5. But I don't like jumping out of the bar to that A sharp, so I actually just play it with my fingers. It's a tiny stretch. You know, I can kind of hold on to that final note of the arpeggio and then grab the A sharp of measure 6. I find that just a little bit smoother, but you could easily use a bar. So going from measure 6. So that's somewhere where it's like you don't want to be switched to piano just directly. You're going to have to finesse that a little bit. I essentially just do a decrescendo on measure 8 there, rather than like a strict switch to piano, right? And I think for that cadence there, when you're doing the B chord, don't do the strong weak thing there. Just keep those notes strong, strong, relax. So that the 5 chord going to the 1 chord there is, I know it's a secondary dominant, but the B chord going to the E chord there, there's some tension and relaxation, which would be a natural way to phrase this. So measure 9. So here, don't forget to do a bar over 4 strings. If you forget to do it over 4 strings and you do it over 3 strings, because it starts with only 3 strings, you're going to have to recorrect to grab that E later in the measure. So make sure you bar all 4 strings. Starting from measure 9 again. Keep it down so it's still there. Keep it strong through here. So I would ditch, you know, from measure 14, 15, 16, I would ditch the strong weak idea because it's just, he switched, it's not the same function, it's not non-chord tones anymore. Open, open. Measure 23 is a little bit, you really have to jump that second finger over. So that's one of the places in the piece where you don't have a free finger, like the final note of the previous thing. Well, the upper and sustained note is still ringing. So it's just make that as clean as you can. There's no trick to it. You just have to jump your finger at the last possible moment to reduce the damage or lack of sustain. So that's the piece. You know, by practicing the first 2 measures really properly, you can pretty much get the idea for the whole piece. So just try to lock in those early things we talked about the microphrasing of strong weak, and getting the bass note first and then the rest of the chord, so you can transition through this beautiful piece. Like I said, it's a really pretty little piece for the collection, despite being still very pedagogically clear, ultra clear, like lots of his studies. So great little etude for musicality and technique. So just a great example of the Carcassi studies.